hobbyists. Welcome to the Car King Sports and Variety Show. I'm your host, the Catman, Brian Cataquet, a.k.a. the Car King. We are live on ABC's KMET 1490am.com. Your number one spot right here for news and talk on the West Coast. I thank everyone for tuning in this morning. On the telephone line, I welcome in to the program legendary performing artist, founding member of the popular 60s rock group Jay and the Americans. We welcome in the great Sandy Dean. Sandy, it's an honor to have you. Thanks for being here this morning.
Well, thanks for asking me, Brian. It's a pleasure.
Sandy, reading your bio, music came into your life at age 5 because of your older sister. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, talk a little bit about your upbringing and how music evolved in your life.
Well, the first thing was that I had an older sister who was a professional singer. And in the house, all I ever heard were the records that she played, which were, Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Bessie Smith, all of the classic artists of that time, Sarah Vaughan, Mel Torme, a lot of great artists. So that was my original background as a baby. And when you lay in a crib and you hear that stuff, it kind of soaks in. And then when I got a little older, my own musical taste took over, and I started seeing things TV-wise. I saw the Everly Brothers perform on television, and that had a huge effect on me, watching the two of them harmonize and just playing their guitars. And music started shifting towards from the country rock to rock and roll. There were a lot of black artists that I listened to. I remember the early artists that inspired me, Little Anthony and the Imperials, Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. It was living in New York was a huge advantage because we had so many different radio stations that played all different kinds of music. So you weren't just locked into one thing. And I think that the broad band of being exposed to so much music and such variable music was a blessing for me. It gave me a good sounding board to pull from. Because everybody pulls from what they hear and what they've heard before, and I had a lot to pull from.
Yeah, and besides those groups, Sandy, it was those fond memories in Brooklyn on Flatbush Avenue, hearing Whispering Bells by the Dell Vikings that caught your ear, and Deanne and the Belmonts, right?
Deanne and the Belmonts came out when I think it was in high school, and that blew me away. Whispering Bells is one of our favorites in Brooklyn on Flatbush Avenue. We used to go to a place that had a jukebox. I can't tell you how many quarters I lost to Whispering Bells. It was amazing. Brooklyn was kind of a place where there were a million groups singing on the corner. That wasn't a fantasy. It was the truth. We all were looking for a place to sing where you could hear some echo. We would sing in storefronts where they had glass windows, where there was a little vestibule. We would sing in staircases where the sound would bounce around. We would sing in the bathrooms in school, of course there was tile. Even in the buildings, the lobbies had marble hallways, and we would sing in the hallways, and the sound would bounce around. And it made it sound like the records on the radio. And we were all imitating what we heard on the radio. And that's how everybody started. There were 1,000 groups on every corner singing and snapping. It was very unusual. We were different because we had this one guy, Marty, who was in the group, who played guitar. And then what was unheard of, we got a guy that plays guitar. So he would play the chords, and sometimes he'd even get them right. And we would learn songs right off the top 10 list that was being played on AM radio. There was no FM. It was great fun. There were a lot of groups that we thought were much better than us, and yet somehow we managed to rise to the top. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart.
And Sandy, you mentioned these groups. I often wonder there must have been so much competition. I mean, you had yourself, Jay and the Americans in Brooklyn. You also had the Mystics, right? Then you had Deanne in the Bronx. Then you had Vito Picone and the Elegants in Staten Island, right? Then you have Valley in Jersey, Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons. So there must have been a lot of competition in the New York City tri-state area. Did you guys have you guys get along? Was there any jealousy, rivalry back then?
Well, listen, every entertainer has an ego. Everybody wants to be, the best act. But in my heart, I always thought that everybody somehow was ahead of us. And all those guys were a little older than me, and they had more experience when we came into the business. Little Anthony and the Imperials scared my pants off to be on the same bill with them because I had seen them before we were assigned artist doing a show at the Brooklyn Paramount Theater, I think it was, or the Fox Theater, and those guys were so good that to think that we were going to sing on stage with them, scared the hell out of us, and yet we managed to survive that. We became great friends. We've played many shows together, and we do compete with each other, but friendly competition. I mean, like we laugh about it. Usually, I got a call from, I think it was Clarence one time, and he said, "You guys killed us the other night. I mean, how did you guys were amazing." And it was a huge compliment to me because I looked up to them so much, and I think they're still one of the greatest vocal acts in the business. And we saw Little Anthony not so long ago. And, boy, he still sings his rear end off.
Yeah, and like in the mid-'50s, like 1956, you mentioned Frankie Lyman. They had that hit, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? It was like a million record-selling album. And there were 13, 14-year-olds buying the album, right?
Yep. I was sitting home watching the Frankie Lane television show. Frankie Lane, the singer, wound up having a TV show. And Frankie Lyman and the teenagers slid out onto the stage and jumped over a fence and sang, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? And I think that was a moment that just clicked in my head where I said to myself, I want to do that. I mean, it was building and building, but I think that was the quintessential moment to say, look at how young they are. They're like me. I can do this, and I'm going to do this. And I set out on a quest to form a band because at the time I was singing myself with my own guitar and writing songs. And I started putting groups together, and eventually I got the magic combination of Jay Traynor and myself and Howie Kane and Marty Sanders and Kenny Vance. And we put it all together, and we wound up, luckily, forcing an audition with two guys named Jerry Lever and Mike Stoller. And that was what really cinched the deal because they were the best record producers and songwriters in rock and roll at the time and still one of the best, well-known. We learned to have discipline from them. We learned to make records, how you work in a studio and compile things and build an arrangement around a song and a vocal and backgrounds and mixing and all of the fine things that it takes to complete a record. And we owe them everything, even our name. They wanted to name us Binky Jones and the Americans, and Jay Traynor said, I can't go through life named Binky Jones. He said, so we settled on Jay because that was his nickname. And they said, okay, you can be Jay and the Americans. But they were the driving force behind the group's success.
We're talking with the legendary Sandy Dean, founding member of Jay and the Americans. So, Sandy, so what age did you put the first group together? Was it the Harbor Lights?
Yep. That was when I moved from Brooklyn to Belle Harbor, Queens. I was in Far Rockaway High School. I got a bunch of kids together in the neighborhood. The first group, the Harbor Lights, the original group, I told everybody in high school, I said, listen, in order to audition for this group, you have to have a white dinner jacket and black pants. And there were two girls that had white dinner jackets. And they were, both girls were great singers, too. So they made the group, but we had like 6 or 7 people originally. And then I just started whittling down to the people that were really good. And it wound up being the one girl, myself, and a guy named Kenny Vance. And the three of us formed a group called the Harbor Lights. We got signed to a record label called Ivy Records. Got put out on the air. I remember Bruce Morrow playing it in a battle of the bands, and we won. And we became minor celebrities. You know, in high school, we became, you know, every dance, we were there singing songs and performing. And then finally, we got signed to a manager named Jim Gribble. He managed the Mystics and the Passions and the Mellow Kings and all of these local acts that had records out, that had hits. We were the only group that had a record out that really wasn't a big hit, but it was a local hit. And we started doing shows with those acts, and that's where we heard Jay Traynor, because he was singing lead for the Mystics. And Kenny and I looked at each other and said, boy, if we could get him to be our lead singer and have just a guys group, and we got tired of having a girl, a lead singer, because we needed 2 dressing rooms. She needed her own dressing room, and she needed her own costumes and her own makeup, and it took her 40 minutes to get ready, and we were ready in 5. So he said, we want an all-boys group. So we asked Jay, who wasn't happy with being in the Mystics, if he'd join us. And he said, yeah, right away. I mean, he was anxious to not be in the Mystics, even though they had that huge hit, Usher By, because he wasn't the original lead singer. The original lead was gone, and he replaced them. And he always felt like they treated him like a second-class citizen. So being in a group is like being in a family. And, you know, sometimes families get along and sometimes they don't. And when you're not comfortable with your family, you don't want to be there, you know. So we happened to be lucky and asked him at a time when he was really unhappy with the situation. And he joined us, and then I called my friend Howie, and he joined us. And then Marty was playing the guitar for 3 groups at the time. And he came down to rehearsals, and we started putting the band together, and that became Jay and the Americans. And the next step was auditioning for Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. And they were thrilled. They said, wow. They were impressed because we were these clean-cut white kids, but we had some soul. You know, Jay Traynor had a very soulful voice. And they only handled black artists. We were the first white act that they ever got involved in other than Elvis Presley. Wow. So they had the Exciters, the Drifters, the Coasters, and us, and Elvis. So it was a pretty interesting office. And like I said, we learned songwriting, arranging, and making records in the studio from those guys. And they were at the peak of their career at the time. And it was a blessing to be in that office. It's like going to rock and roll college, you know. And the people that we were exposed to, all the songwriters that came into that office, from Carole King to Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann, to it was amazing. It was just an amazing day to be in that office rehearsing a song. You saw 30 people that were immensely important to the music business, just wandering in and out of that office.
So the original members of Jay and the Americans, it was Jay Traynor, Kane, Vance, and yourself, Dean, right?
Right, and Marty Sanders was our guitar accompanist. He wasn't always there. He was busy playing for 3 groups at the time. But by the time that we recorded She Cried Without Him, and then he was in ROTC for the summer. You know, he was on a program where he spent his summers in the ROTC,
right,
as a reserve, and we recorded, and then he came in and finished the album with us. So he was there from day one too. You know, there were 5 of us. in the beginning, and then Jay left. He wanted to think he could be a solo artist because after the first big success with She Cried, we had a couple of bombs, and he got a little discouraged, and people whispered in his ear, "Oh, you ought to go out on your own," and he fell for that, and he left. And at
right,
that
so
point,
the first major hit, it was She Cried, and that was performed by Jay Traynor. That was his major hit in the group.
The first hit record we had was Tonight from West Side Story.
Right, that one sold like 50,000 copies, I read.
Yeah, that was a territorial hit. That was a hit on the East Coast, a big hit. Because in those days, to sell 50,000 singles was a big deal. But the record never spread past, like, the 4 states, But it gave us a leg up with the record company that they said, okay, we'll take them in for another recording session. So Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller took us into the studio for United Artists, who they had assigned us to. And then we recorded She Cried. And She Cried wasn't supposed to be the A-side either. Dawning, the flip side, was supposed to be the A-side, and UA was pushing that. And a disc jockey on the West Coast flipped the record over, fell in love with it, played it constantly, locked the door to the studio and played it for like 18 hours straight, just kept repeating the record. And it broke in California, and it worked its way, because the record had already died because of Dawning. All the rest of the states had given up on the record, and it worked its way back across the country because of that one guy in California.
Man.
It was a very strange story, but I guess it was supposed to be, and it became a huge hit. It was like, I think, number 3 or number 2 everywhere in the country.
So let's talk quickly about Jay Black. How did Jay Black get involved with the group?
Well, Marty, like I said, Marty was like, he played with anybody and everybody he could. And he had a group that he played guitar and sang in called the Empires. And David Blatt was the guy who lived next door to him and was his neighbor and his friend and was in the group, the Empires, with Marty. And he also had another separate group called the Two Chaps, which was just David Blatt and Marty Sanders. So when Traynor quit the group, we were looking for a lead singer, and actually Howie said, "Well, what about your friend Dave?" And Marty said, "Well, okay, I'll call him." So we called him up, and he came over and he auditioned, and he walked into my house and in the finished basement, and we said, "Sing a song that you think will show your voice off." So he sang a song called Cara Mia, and the china in the cabinet, my mother's china cabinet upstairs, was shaking because his voice was so powerful. And everybody came running downstairs from upstairs, and the neighbors were hanging out the windows because you could hear this guy a long way away. So by the time he finished that song, I said, "You know what?" I said, "Your name isn't David Blatt anymore. Your name is now Jay." So he changed it from Jay Blatt to Jay Black himself. He thought that sounded better. And that's how that started. But then we went up to Lieber and Stoller because we had our contract with them, and we told them that Jay Traynor was no longer with us. We had a new lead singer. And they loved Jay Traynor's voice because it was soulful. Jay Black's voice wasn't really what you'd call a soulful voice. He wasn't a blues singer, or he didn't sound like a black artist. He sounded very white, but very unique and powerful. But it wasn't up Lieber and Stoller's alley, and they were very frank about it. They weren't crazy about David or Jay. They were very unhappy with him, so they said, "You know what? We'll release. You can go get another producer. We'll keep you signed, but we'll sign you to another producer." So we went to some friends who we had made, who were called Kama Sutra Productions. And that was Artie Rip, and they later became a record company called Buddha Records. But at the time, they were a production company, and we went in, and they started working with us. Like I said, we were buddies. We had become friendly with people in the business. And they believed in us, and they thought that Dave's voice was great. So they started looking for material for him. And first we did Only in America, which was a reject by the Drifters. But that was done with Lieber and Stoller. That went to number 19, and then they lost interest in us. So we went to Kama Sutra, and they started finding material for us, like songs called Come a Little Bit Closer and Let's Lock the Door. And,
just great stuff. Great stuff. And we have a little mix we're going to play right now of Jay and the Americans. Let's play Jay and the Americans.
This magic moment, so different and so new, was like any other, until I kissed you, and then it happened. It took me by surprise. I knew that you felt it too, by the look in your eyes, sweeter than a wine, softer than a summer night. Everything I want I have, whenever I hold you tight. This magic moment, Cara Mia, why must we say goodbye each time we part? My heart wants to die, darling, hear my prayer. Come to me there, I'll be your love till the And as I rode away, I could hear her say to Jose, come a little bit closer, you're my kind of man, so big and so strong. Come a little bit closer, I'm all alone, and the night is so long. La, 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 la,
You just heard Jay and the Americans. With us is Sandy Dean of Jay and the Americans. Great stuff, Sandy, huh?
Yeah, I'm very proud of this stuff. You know, it's a real unique thing to last as long as we have. I mean, you know, She Cried was out in 61, 62. It's like 53 years we've been together in one form or another. We've changed lead singers. This is our third Jay we're up to. We're still doing 50 to, well, when we're doing it, when this COVID thing is over, we do about 50 to 60 performances, concerts a year all over the country. And people still love the music. They still come out to see us. It's been a wonderful trip, and we love doing it. I mean, you know, there's an expression, keeping the music alive, and our expression is the music's keeping us alive, both the audience and the groups, the artists. Because I think without it, we just curl up in a ball and disappear.
And Sandy, over the past 8 years, you released, I think you released 4 latest CDs. Is that
correct? With our
correct?
new Jay. Yeah, absolutely. We've done some new stuff. Marty wrote some songs. We wrote some songs. We redid some of the records with the new lead singer so people can hear how well he does the music. You know, it's all on our website and our store. Anybody wants it, it's jayandtheamericans.net or .com, and you can get them there. They're really cool CDs. We love doing the stuff, and we love recording and making music. We also love performing live. You know, it's a miracle that we're still around to do it, you know.
And do you still keep in contact with Jay Black?
No, we haven't. You know, he's not well, and he's kind of reclusively retired.
Yeah, and
you know,
I read something that you took over the name. I don't know if you want to get into that conversation. We have a couple of minutes left. You took over the name Jay and the Americans?
Well, it was my name to begin with, you know.
Right.
So, but I had to wind up buying it back because he was using it. When we abandoned the name, he wound up getting the rights to it, even though we were all partners in the name. And he continued for a while on his own as Jay and the Americans, but he wasn't supposed to do that. But we didn't care. We were all doing other things. And, I wound up buying the name in bankruptcy from his bankruptcy and getting all the original Americans back together, except Kenny, who has his own group. So there are 3 original Americans and a new Jay. And we've been doing it for 15 years, and it's been a wonderful life. What can I tell you?
Well, listen, I was listening to some of your greatest hits. I didn't know that in '67 you guys sang "Always Something There to Remind Me," the popular '80s hit by Naked Eyes.
Yes.
I mean, that's great stuff. I mean, that's really a time capsule.
Yeah, we did a lot of different. The only criteria for us to record a song was that we liked it. Like I said, we had a very, very wide, varied taste in music. And to us, every song, if it's a great song, then you can make a great record of it. Didn't matter what style it was. I mean, Cara Mia was like opera. It was totally different. So
right, and you did it with Magic Moment, right? Magic Moment, originally the Drifters, right? And then you took it over, and you forget it. It went crazy.
We did that as a tribute to the Drifters. I'm the proudest of that song because I was the record producer on that song and put that whole thing together, that whole album, actually. And Magic Moment was our biggest hit, biggest selling record. So it's one of our theme songs, And
what
every
a
time
classic.
we go on stage, we call it a Magic Moment.
They don't make it like that anymore, Sandy?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of great artists out there that are still around. Well, we're one of them. We feel we're one of them, but, like I say, it's the music that's important.
Well, listen, I'd love to have you back. Maybe we could do a part 2. You have such a long history in the business.
Yeah, they say I'm long-winded, so I could do a part 2.
Hey, thank you so much, and you stay safe. Happy holiday season, all right?
You too. Same to everybody, all the listeners, all the fans. Hey, happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays. Stay safe.
And the website is jayandtheamericans.net. That was a founding member, the legendary Sandy Dean. Until next week, happy collecting to all.